welcome back to Push to Be More. My name is Matt Edmundson, and we're going to jump into another exploration of what fuels this thing called life. Yes, we are. Today, I am chatting with Chris Madder from MTA Consulting. We're going to be diving into his unique life experiences, the hurdles he has had to push through, what he does to recharge his batteries, and the steps he's taking to be more. In other words, we're going to be looking at push to be and more. Yes, now don't forget, you can find all the detailed show notes and the complete transcript of our conversation on the website at pushtobemore.com. So if you can't take notes, don't panic. We've got them for you. They're all there. You can go get them for free. Yes, you can. But if you're like me, you're an avid note taker, join in as well, because I have a book just full of notes from guests, which is amazing. And I dare say Chris is going to bring some today as well. Now, let me take a brief second to thank PodJunction, the company that makes this show possible, headed up by the wonderful Sadaf Bainon, who has also started up hosting some of these podcasts and doing some of the interviews, which is fab. It means we can get more out there. But if you want to understand how podcasting can help your business grow like it's helped mine grow in insane ways, then go have a conversation with Sadaf. She would love to have a conversation with you. This is an unbelievable networking tool, podcasting. It really does open doors like nothing I've ever seen. And I get to have great conversations with great people like Chris, who probably, being realistic, would never have met had we not have got the podcast. And so it's just a wonderful thing. Go check it out at podjunction.com. Go talk to Sadaf. Tell her I said, how's it? And she will help you as much as she can. Now, let's talk about Chris, the founder and CEO of MTA Consulting, with 27 years of experience coaching leaders, consulting, and developing talent from entry-level roles to the C-suite. A former professional athlete, which is not something we can all say. Let's be real. Chris combines insights from elite sports and business to help individuals and leaders achieve greatness. Based off the beautiful south coast of Massachusetts, he enjoys family time, beach days, because why would you not? Golf, okay. Playing the guitar, with you on that one, Chris. When he's not inspiring the next generation of leaders, that's what you'll find him doing. Chris, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's really great to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today, Matt.
Oh, it's great. And also, should probably give a quick shout out to Neil Roberts, who's been on the show recently. He introduced us. He said, Matt, you really need to speak to this guy. He's an absolute legend. So
yeah, very nice.
I'm looking forward to it myself. So Chris, let's get started. Let's start with my favorite question that I like to ask everybody. And it's to be fair, if you're listening to the show, we ask this question at the start of every conversation. It's the only question I've told you that I'm going to ask, right? And so it's great because when people come onto the show, you've done podcasts, but not everybody has. And I think knowing the first question just puts everybody at ease, really, a little bit, and it just starts the conversation going. So let's do it, Chris. If you had your own podcast and you could interview anybody on your podcast, someone that's had a big influence on your life, past or present, who would you interview and why?
So it is a great question, and it required some thought because there were many names that came up. And if you would ask me on the spot, I would have given you 4 or 5 and you would have pinned me down for one. So the one person that, and eventually I do want to start doing podcasts to support my business. And like you said, Matt, expand the network, but it would have to be my first manager in business, whose name is Bob Dickey.
Okay.
And so I'll tell you why. Bob is a blue collar guy from New England, and he actually went to college at San Diego State, came back home, built his family, and started his career in sales. Mm-hmm. And he was an individual contributor for about 5 years selling, I'm going to date us here, back in the 90s, fax machines and copy machines.
Oh, wow. I had one.
Yeah, back in the 90s, we all did. And so he happened upon a company that did IT consulting and staffing, and he was selling copiers to them and ended up working there because there was so much energy in the building. So after 3 years of selling, he got promoted to be a manager. And I backfilled his seat as a salesperson. I was the first person he ever hired.
Wow.
As a manager. Bob went on every 3 years to earn a promotion from branch manager to regional VP, VP to president CEO, ended up running a $1.4 billion company. Coming from this little brick building that looked like a bomb shelter back in Woburn, Massachusetts back in the 90s. So Bob taught me I mean, he taught me everything about sales. He taught me so much about leadership and managing. He had that tough love. He was tough on me, but I knew it was coming from a good place. And so I just entrusted my career to Bob for 20 years. I worked for him for 20 years. I then moved on to a new opportunity in a new industry in healthcare. And then a year later, he was looking for work and we needed a president. So I told the founder of the company, Joe, I'm like, Joe, you got to hire Bob. This guy's the best I've ever worked for. He jumped into that company, helped it grow from 175 million to 500 million. So, he's touched two big companies in his career that turned to gold, but I credit so much of it. It's his work ethic, his discipline, his coaching style. There's just so many things I could say about
Bob Dickey.
I got to get him. Like if you can get him, get him. But I hope I know him well enough that I think maybe he would consider doing a podcast with me, because he's one of those like really private guys. Like he's hard to get to know, and so I've seen behind the curtain of how Bob thinks about things, and we're obviously good friends, and he's always been a great mentor to me.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know what, Chris? I love the story. Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
And two, every time I ask this question, I'm always intrigued by the answers that people give, because obviously these people, like Bob, means a lot to you, right? He's very well connected to you, and people give answers which are usually very meaningful, which is wonderful. Not many people have given answers where it's like a direct mentor like that. This guy's had such a big impact on your life for such a long period of time. Yeah. And I love the fact that, when you went and worked in a different company, you're like, Bob, you need to come work in this company as well. Is to say,
everything he taught me about sales, I used on him to sell him on coming to work with us. It's like a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah. I remember the first, really the only boss I've ever had, because I've worked for myself most of my life, but he's also been on the show, actually, the guy called Simon, still very good friends. He moved out to New Zealand, sold the business and moved to New Zealand. Great guy, but a really fascinating salesperson, right? Not your archetypical kind of Zig Ziglar, and I love the Zig Ziglar approach. I really do. Sure. I learned a lot from him, but this guy is just unusual, an unusual personality, looks, the way he carries himself, everything was quite unusual. He had this trick though, Chris, that I picked up quite early on. I started working for him just about a year or so after I graduated university, and we were selling saunas. Okay. And I watched him, and whenever he was in the room, he would talk slowly like this, and everybody would be sort of waiting, for the next word to come out of his mouth. But he would do this thing where he would just slowly nod his head like this. Okay. And what you found yourself doing as you've drawn into his the way he spoke, you would find yourself nodding along. Right. It was a really interesting thing that I noticed quite early on. I'm like, what? So I've started doing it myself. It's really fascinating. Just these little things that you pick up from your mentors, isn't it?
It is. No, it really is. Like you said, I just wrote a book that came out 2 weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. It was a 14-month journey. It's something I've always wanted to do. Yeah. And of course, Bob didn't want to be directly quoted in the book, because that's Bob. He doesn't want to be interviewed. However, he's like, Chris, everything I've taught you, put in the book. It's fine. Just make sure you reference me and footnote me. I'm like, no problem, Bob. So, he just taught me so much about so many things.
Mm. Yeah. No, excellent. So tell me about the book. Anybody that's been in business for a while has this mad idea one day that they're going to write a book. Very few people actually do it. So you've managed to do it and launched it a few weeks ago. What made you decide to do that?
Lots of things. Back in 2013, I found this deep passion for coaching. I grew up in business and leadership and sports, but I always was fascinated by coaching. I mean, Bob was a coach for me. My college baseball coach is very meaningful. I'll talk about him in a second. And my company, Ronstadt at the time, moved me off of a leadership role, or I should say off of a leadership sales role, into a leadership people development role in HR and human resources. And, the CEO came to me and said, Chris, you always seem to have highly engaged teams. You have all these people going to President's Club. You have the lowest voluntary attrition. Like, what's your secret? And of course, the secret for me was, well, my parents raised me right. I treat people the right way. I ask them about their goals. I don't talk about my goals. I talk about their goals and connect them to the company's vision and all the things that good leaders try to do. And so that's when I thought a lot about my college baseball coach and the lessons he taught me. I'm like, man, I want to incorporate these into the business and the training. And I'm like, I'm going to start to write a book. Well, of course, I'm working 50 hours a week. I'm traveling the world. I was going to Europe and Singapore and everywhere, and never made the time, never found the time, excuse. And so after about 11 years, a year and a half ago, I had a small equity event in my last company. I was a chief revenue officer, and I had a check. I had some cash, and they no longer needed me, and I was on my own. And so I had a decision to either start my own business or stay in corporate America, if you will. And I started my own business. And as soon as I decided to start my own business, I was going to write a book. So I started writing. And upon starting to write, I vetted, publishers, and I went with a hybrid publishing company called Manuscripts, based in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And they help authors like myself, independent people trying to connect the dots to editing, revisions, artwork, marketing, the relationships with Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and all the relationships you have. They do everything for you. Obviously, it costs a little bit more than just straight self-publishing, but I just started writing. Now, I thought I was going to write a leadership book. I mean, I've been wanting to write a leadership coaching book for years. But because I just really kind of lost my job, if you will, I was no longer needed in a company. I was tired of other people owning my outcomes. And I'm like, this is an opportunity for me to write about my mindset. And so I started to write a lot about my mindset. And then I started to think about all the athletes I played with previously: Bo Jackson, Michael Jordan, Derek Jeter. What was their mindset, right? I played for World Series manager Terry Francona. And so when I had to come up with a company name for my business, I knew coaching was going to be a lot about behavior and skills change. And all I kept thinking about was my college baseball coach, Boyd Coffey. And so you can see me on the screen. He had a giant wooden sign over his desk that said, "Son, make the adjustment." He was a good old boy from Athens, Tennessee, served Army infantry, played for the Yankees, and played college and professional baseball. And he was my coach for, he was at Rollins for 25 years. I was with him for 4. But when I asked Boyd, what does, make the adjustment mean? What I learned was, you're the one that has to make the change. So when I was struggling with my studies as a freshman in college, he's like, "Chris, you got to make the adjustment with your studies. You got to start partying less and studying more." And he was right. I was partying too much. I wasn't, so. And then as I accelerated my life and went to, an INSEAD program in Amsterdam, I started to learn about emotional intelligence. And I'm like, oh my God, Boyd was light years ahead in the areas of self-awareness, self-control. And I'm like, wow. And so my company is named MTA Consultancy with the tagline to make the adjustment. And we want to create better leaders and sales professionals in this world. That's our mission. And so it was born a lot from Boyd. It was born a lot from what I learned from him and how he impacted the 300 guys that played for Rollins College. And I'm like, wow, I have a very unique opportunity to bring his message to the greater masses through mostly business. I mean, I've worked with a couple of sports teams, but most of what I do is really working with businesses, $10 to $100 million or so plus. So it's a gift. He gave me a gift, and I try to give that gift to the people I work with.
Fantastic. I mean, I love that. Love that story. Make the adjustment. It's one of the things that, having been around a little bit myself, Chris, I remember the sort of the movies, the old school movies, like I say old school, like 80s movies where you would have the sort of the coach and you would have this guy, with the one-liners. I'm thinking like Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, these kind of guys. And I'm like, I just remember these sort of films with these coaches who would have this sort of advice and I'm sort of thinking today, and I'm like, I don't see that as much on TV now. Everything seems to have got a little bit more complicated, so you were right, make the adjustment. Whereas today you'd probably have to have I don't know, and I don't want to belittle anything, but maybe some pastoral advice, and then somebody over here and maybe a bit of therapy. And so, whereas it feels like we've overcomplicated things a little bit.
Right.
And what I love is this sort of old school coach just going, no, make the adjustment.
Make the adjustment.
And it's as simple as that. And I don't know, maybe it's just me being a bit too nostalgic, and maybe we haven't overcomplicated things, but I love the story.
Yeah, I think you're onto it. And I agree. I think I've always made the comment, there's no school like old school. I just think that there's a lot of old school principles and philosophies that the world is lost a little bit of track of. And it's nice to bring them back. I mean, as a baby boomer, I think, or I should say as a Gen Xer, right? We are the last generation to grow up in a world without computers, in a world without cell phones, all this old school stuff. And so, but we're also young enough to know how to use computers and technology, et cetera. So, whereas the boomers sometimes struggle with it. So for me, it's nice to bring the message. And I've done a few keynotes, Matt. What's fascinating, okay, is I write the book. It's exciting. I've done a couple of keynotes. And one of the questions I get is, well, Chris, you're going to write another book. What would it be about? My answer so far has been, I'm going to write another book called Make the Adjustment for Kids. And it's going to be kind of primary focus area of that 12 to 18 age range. This book can be read by anybody over 18. I mean, you can read it at 13 and maybe get it, but my book's really more for adults. I want to make a book to help these kind of child and adolescent kids make the adjustment. Because, and I have three of them, by the way. I have a 24, 22, and 20-year-old that are, they're growing up, but even my kids still have to make the adjustment. And so they already know what's coming when they come talk to dad about whatever's going on at work or at school or in a relationship. I'm like, you're in control of these outcomes. You're in control of what you do and don't do. So if you're in a bad relationship right now, you're the one who has to make the adjustment, right? You can't control the other side. You can't control what the other person's going to do. You can only control what you do. And as soon as you start to, in my keynotes, I'll give away, one of the talking points. I have a picture of a mirror and I'll say, if you need to make an adjustment right now and you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, the bad news is you're the problem. But the good news is you're the solution. So people look at the mirror and see the problem. Like, no, you're the way out of the hole. Like, whatever hole you're stuck in, you can choose to get out of the hole. And my book kind of really frames the algorithm of the mindset and the approach that I believe any human can take to get out of whatever hole that they're stuck in, whether it's at work or in their personal life.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. I love that. There's no school like old school in it. And I love how you're also thinking about kids as well, because you're right. One of the interesting things I've got three kids of my own, similar sorts of ages, actually, Chris.
Yeah.
I remember my eldest, who academically, really clever kid. Do you know what I mean? Straight A's, sailed through, and lovely kid. I mean, super proud of all my kids. I'm not going to lie that I feel like I've looked out in a massive way.
Yeah.
But I remember when he was, I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story, but when he took his first driving test, he failed.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there thinking, I said to him, I think, I don't know what my exact words were, but something along the lines of, son, that's brilliant. It's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, it's good that you failed at something, because up until now, he'd not really failed at anything.
Right.
And it wasn't then that he started asking a few girls out and some of the girls said no. And like, actually, I was quite grateful for this, because I wanted him to understand he needed to be resilient, and it's this really odd tension, isn't it, as a parent, where you want the world for your kids, but I don't want kids that are so soft and so entitled, that they're a burden on society in many ways.
Sure. I get it. Yeah.
I'm glad you're going to do that.
Yeah, it's great. Well, and to your point, like even that story, I've been inspired by certain coaches or books or, so Jocko Willink, ex-Navy SEAL, has a phrase, good. Just like you said, hey, you failed your test? Good. Right? Good. Like there's something to be learned from that. And so I get what you're saying. And
he wrote the book Extreme Ownership, didn't he?
He did. Great book. It's excellent. One of the best leadership books out there for sure. And that's when I knew I was on track too, because before I read that book, between Bob Dickey and other leaders I work for, Dan Foley, there's so many I could list, but I feel like I learned a lot of those lessons already. But Jocko's book's outstanding. It's one of them.
Yeah, I remember the first time I read it. I've read it several times, because there's just no escape, is there? You can't. You can't pass the book. It doesn't give you any room to sort of maneuver out of that. No. So I'm curious, Chris. I mean, you've traveled the world. You've done a lot. You've written a book. You're an established author now. You've got some, these ideas and so on and so forth. What's been a big challenge then that you've had to face, that you've had to go through yourself, that you've had to push through, where maybe some of these principles were either helpful or maybe where you learned them in reality?
Well, I mean, it almost starts 18 months ago. I'll tell you that I was at that crossroads in my life where I had the golden handcuffs where I was making a very good living for 27 years and had opportunities to keep running companies, CRO, CEO, SVP of sales, whatever job title I could get. And I made the very cognitive decision to go on what I now come to find out is called the hero's journey. There's a book, The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, that I just learned about like a few weeks ago when somebody read my book and said, Chris, you just went on this journey. So that's what happened to me. I had to kind of give up the guaranteed income to take a chance and start a business. So you talk about, being self-employed. It's my first time at age 53 starting my own company. So even though I've run companies, I feel like I know the levers to pull. I know what I'm doing. I can sell, I can deliver, all that stuff. You open the doors, there is no revenue. There's no pipeline. You would just have these ideas and this kind of belief. And I always had this belief in myself, and I give my parents a lot of credit. My mom passed away a couple months ago. It's very sad. Long journey with COPD and emphysema. And she finally passed, which in a way was a blessing. She was sick, but my parents gave me I'm an only child, gave me an insane amount of belief. Yeah. And so I'm very fortunate and lucky to have that belief because I've always joked that hope is not a strategy, but on May 19th, hope was a strategy. I'm like, all right, I hope this works, And so I'm making less than I did 2 years ago, but I made more this year than I did last year. And I can see the run rate for next year is looking really good. And I'm feeling really good about what I do. I have no anxiety. My clients are very happy. I love the work that I do. So I think, taking that step back a year and a half ago and taking a hard reset, there was another book that I read during that. It was about the Spanish Armada, Burn the Boats, where they talked about, there was a general in the Spanish Armada in the war and they were losing the battle. And he said, burn the boats. And the soldiers said, why? He goes, well, if you burn the boats, there's no plan B and there's only plan B. We have to win. We can't lose. And so I started to research that concept, and sure enough, Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift, you start to go through these very successful people, Derek Jeter, they had one plan A. There was no plan B. So Ed Sheeran, when he was trying to learn guitar and, slugging down at bars, making 200 euros or whatever it was at the time, he's like, look, if I can make 200 bucks a night, I'll be fine the rest of my life. And he was just focused on mastering being an amazing musician. And so once I decided to start my business, I burned the boats. I stopped taking recruiting calls. I wasn't listening to that. I'm like, I am going forward, even though I'm making less. I believe in what I'm doing. My clients are telling me what I'm doing works. I've had 18 client engagements in a year and a half. 17 have renewed their contract. And the only one that didn't was a company where the leader went to another company and hired. So,
fair play.
So it's kind of like 18 for 18. So, so I know what I'm doing is working. I'm just continuing to build the business, but it was a huge leap of faith. It was a huge leap.
How was your family with that?
I had the support. So my wife and I talked about it. And her rule was basically, look, Chris, I want you to be happy, but as long as the bills get paid and we can figure it out, she goes, I have complete confidence you'll figure this out. So I cut back on some expenses and certain things. Instead of the $120 a month gym membership, I bought a bunch of kettlebells and work out on my own, but, but you just cut back a little bit and be smart about money. And, there's a chapter in my book, Matt, called Owner's Mentality. And it was a lesson I learned back in the 90s. So I started a division or a branch for a company with somebody else's money. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, what's your silver bullet advice? And he said, Chris, act like it's your own money. Like, I know it's the company's money, but your rent, your employees, your marketing, everything you do, just act like it's your own money and you'll make the right decision. And so sure enough, when I start my own company, owner's mentality kicked right in. Okay, if I'm going to spend $1,000 on an email list, I got to be really sure I vet that list and I know what I'm, because I don't want to waste a dollar. Because everything matters. So, and then again, owner's mentality goes into your personal life, right? So owning your outcomes with your fitness or your food or whatever else it is. But yeah, no, I was, my parents were like, Chris, you should do it. And my wife supported me, and that's really all I needed.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How when I started my journey, similar thing. I had a job, and it was an all right job, and I enjoyed it. I actually really loved what I was doing. To be fair, Chris, and I lost my job, and I had my firstborn child. He was maybe a few months old when this had all started to happen. I think it wasn't, so I've got a wife, I've got a new kid, I've got debt, and I have this crazy idea
Right.
And looking back, people ask me about it all the time, but looking back, I would never have been able to do what I've done if it wasn't for my wife.
Right.
And that support from her. Because she was working, when we had Josh, my eldest, she had a job. She actually earned more money than I did.
Right.
For a season, and she quit her job because she wanted to be a full-time mum. She just and that was it. There was no going back. She was like, and so I was the sole source of income. And you just kind of you look back, all the bridges are burnt in some respects, and you've got is an idea, but I look back and I go, there's a great quote by a chap called Smith Wigglesworth, which has always stuck with me. And he said, everything that I am under God, I owe to my dear wife. And I think, what a remarkable story. And I look back, and I haven't been in business however long, 20 odd years now. And you just kind of go, every step of the way, whenever it's been tricky, whenever it's been difficult, whenever it's been good, I've had the support of Sharon, my wife. And that's a remarkable thing, I think. So it's lovely to hear you say that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you as well. I mean, it's the absolute truth to your point. I don't think you can take that extra leap of faith across that abyss without that level of support. Mm-hmm. I would say too, and I'm sure you find this as well, like my wife is my accountability partner. And so if I'm off track, she has no problem telling me I'm off track. And I honestly, the one thing about Melissa, so by the way, she has a master's degree in behavioral psychology. She's a therapist. So you talk about like, you talk about emotional intelligence and therapy, right? Yeah. So she tries not to give me therapy, but I will say this: when I'm off track, she has intuition. Like if my superpower is recall, I can remember things from dates and times and just recite it. That's what I can do. Hers is intuition. She can see 5 steps ahead of almost any situation in work, relationships. It's insane. So when she says, "Hey, Chris, like you're not anticipating something, you're missing something," I listen because she's right. I grew up, only child, a bit naive. I don't always see maybe the pitfall ahead. She's like, "Oh, Chris, you're going to fall into that hole if you don't do this now." I'm like, "Oh, thank God you said something." So, I mean, on the other side of accountability is fun. We have so much fun together, and she's my best friend. We hang out, all that good stuff. But yeah, she's my accountability partner, and she can see things I can't see, which I think is great to have in a complementary, having a partner that complements you.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really good. I'm intrigued. Then you took the leap. You decided, no, I'm going to give this a go. One of the most amazing stats I heard, which surprised me, someone said to me, "What's the average age someone starts their business?" And I think I just rolled off, 23, 24. And it's actually in the mid 40s is the typical age people sort of start a business. So you're not too far away.
Right.
What's been the biggest lesson so far? I mean, you're a few years into it. And you've come from this hyper successful corporate job. What's been the biggest lesson?
So I just learned it this summer. So I had incremental revenue growth from May of 2023 through June of 2024. And I was very humbled. I was not overconfident. I was like, wow, I'm really lucky. My network came to life and what I'm doing is working and this is great. But what I didn't do is I had 2 big engagements that were ending in July. And as a sales executive, I didn't look ahead of my pipeline. And I didn't really have a strategy in place. Everything I had was based on referrals. And so there is a quote, and it is, I want to get it right. I don't know if it's Andy Elliott or who said it, but he said, the things that you're not doing now are the things that are going to prohibit your growth in the future. And I was like, there were things I wasn't doing in that moment. Actually, it was Alex Hormozy who said it. Alex Hormozy said it. The things you're not doing now is what's going to prohibit your success in the future. And so I didn't have a robust pipeline approach. And I'm a CRO. Like, I know better. I was busy delivering content. I was busy traveling. I was doing my job, but I didn't have a strategy. And so shame on me. And that was a lesson that I learned the hard way in June, July. Thankfully, so July revenue's down, August revenue's down, September revenue's down. I'm like, oh boy, like we're on the slide. And it was down in October. It's up in November, up in December, trending back. So like November, December, January looks really good. So I feel back to stable, and I feel like I have a strategy in place now that will flag me long before that ever, revenue dip happens again. I would say that's one of the big lessons I've learned.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? And I have businesses where you have your traditional clients. I have businesses which is your e-coms, you're selling digital, and the one thing I think I've become obsessed by is the pipeline and the number of new customers that we're getting. What's our new customer acquisition? And in e-commerce, in some respects, it's easier to manage. It's almost easier to predict, but it applies across both ways, doesn't it? Because I was given some advice recently about selling the company, and they're like, kind of, well, you found a buyer, great, go find another one. Don't just assume that they're going to buy it. And so when we sold the company, we had two buyers bidding against each other based off of that advice. And I think this is quite interesting, isn't it? This sort of this constant, this perpetual going and getting the leads, going and getting the referrals, going and getting the the conversations, the network, and doing what it takes to build that in a meaningful way. Because doing content doesn't necessarily do it. Doing Instagram doesn't necessarily do it. But there is something that does seem to do it for you, and you have to get into that groove pretty quickly and stay in it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, I didn't have a robust outbound strategy. I mean, I was networking, I was going to conferences, I'm doing a lot of the things you're supposed to do. But I know my target audience is companies doing 10 to 100 million, because under 10 million can't usually invest in executive coaching, leadership coaching, et cetera. Over 100 million, they have their own training department. And by the way, I've talked to a company that does $1 billion that might bring me in to do some executive coaching, but my sweet spot is 10 to 100 million, because I know those companies do not have a robust training department, but they have enough money to invest in their people, and they just don't know what to do. And so I'm kind of a plug and play, executive coach, leadership coach, sales coach. I can do boot camps. I can do it one day. I can do it over 9 months. I can do all kinds of different things. So, so for me, it was just, the top of the funnel and keeping that more consistent now. And to your point, having choices. I mean, for the first time in October, I actually had a client I walked away from because, they're trying to negotiate to a point where I'm just talking, hey, look, if you don't see the value in what I do and this doesn't make sense for you, that's okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have said that if I didn't have a pipeline. But once you have a pipeline, you have a little more leverage.
You do have a lot more power. And I remember my dad saying that to me once, because I went to my dad years ago and I said, Dad, I think I'm just going to say no to this guy. Because I want, obviously I want more clients, but I think I'm at a place now where I don't have to bend over backwards to this.
You take the right clients, right? You want to take the right clients.
Yeah. And my dad said to me, he said, son, you've just grown up in your business.
Yeah, it's true.
In that sense, the first time you can say no to somebody is quite a liberating thing in many ways, because you don't feel you can in the early days, because you need the money, really.
Exactly right.
Not that anything was, nothing compromised values, but I think you're right. No. You get to choose. You get to choose a little bit more, don't you?
Yeah.
How do you? So how do you manage your day to day? I mean, you've got a lot going on. You're starting your business, building your revenue, building your pipeline, writing a book. You background in professional athlete. How do you stay recharged? How do you stay on top of your game?
Well, I'll say that the first 9 months, I enjoyed being a company of one, but I started to realize I needed some help. So I reached out to my Rollins College network, and I found a paid intern through the master's program they have down there, a woman that's studying international business, 22 years old, incredibly smarter than me. And she works for me part-time, and we do weekly one-on-ones for 30 minutes. She does a lot of my training content development, a lot of my social media content. I've learned a lot from her already, great asset. So just having a little bit of support there has helped me stay focused more on the actual client interactions. But for me, having the discipline, I'll tell you, Matt, I lost myself probably 10 years ago.
Right.
I gained a bunch of weight. When COVID happened, I was drinking too much. I got depressed. So a lot of things unraveled for me there. And I just woke up one day and decided, enough. Chris, you know better. And I wanted to look in the mirror and see the guy I saw when I played professional baseball. And so cut the sauce, went back into the gym, hired a coach, hired a nutritionist, if you will, read some books on it, and just had discipline. And, with discipline comes positive change. So I lost 40 pounds, just slept better, felt better, relationships improved, all of those things. Went to mental health therapy as well. I think that's useful. And really the therapist was great. Like my therapist is a good guy. And he just started talking about the 4 basics. He's like, Chris, you need to sleep better. You need to stop drinking. You need to start working out, and you need to start just, being more mindful and take care of yourself, because you can't take care of other people. You can't take care of yourself. And sounded simple, but once you really focus on it and start to execute a plan, meaning block off time in your day to work out, block off time in your day for your family. Like in my book, Matt, I actually went through this exercise, 720 hours in a month. We all have 720 hours. Take 8 hours a day out to sleep. Right now you have 540, whatever the number is left. How do you spend your time? And it's an exercise that I challenged myself to do. And I found at the time I was out of balance 5-10 years ago. And so I wanted to spend more time with my kids. I want to spend more time with my wife. I want to spend more time with my friends. And I was over invested in work. And like you said, I was successful, I was making good money, but I was out of balance in my life. I had high anxiety. I wasn't happy. I gained weight. And so I'm finding that balance now. I mean, it's funny. I actually, in my keynotes, I have an X, Y, and Z axis of my entire life, where I try to show people my level of anxiety, happiness, and income. And it's funny how when the income was almost lower, my happiness was higher, my anxiety, it's the strangest thing. Because as a provider like you need to make money for your family. But if I make enough money to support my family, it's enough money. I don't need all the extra things. Do I want a brand new Range Rover? Sure. But you know what? I don't need it right. It's like, I'm happy with what I got. So, so yeah, it's just funny how what makes everybody tick, right? For me, it was my own personal fitness, my own happiness, my family, getting more grounded made me happier than all the others.
That's really powerful. I'm intrigued, if you don't mind me asking, Chris, what you talked about depression in COVID. What caused the depression?
So, well, for me, so candidly, and I have no problem telling the story, it's in the book. I was divorced a few years ago. So I was married to my first wife from 96 to 2021. And in 2015, we went to counseling, and we kind of we got to a place where we weren't in a good place. We weren't friends anymore. We weren't enjoying each other's company. We weren't fighting, but we weren't happy. And we both agreed at that time that we were going to raise our kids, and we were going to try to work it out. And so we kind of just, I always say to people, we were like the earth and the moon. I was the earth and she was the moon or whatever. We just kind of revolve around each other. But when COVID happened and you're alone, the running joke is, people either got divorced or had babies during COVID. They either got really close to their spouse or they got further away. And after a few months of COVID, I remember talking to my ex-wife. I said, Kristen, is this our retirement? Like, if we're together, like, we don't even enjoy hanging out. We don't do the same things. Like, what are we doing? And I go, before we hate each other, can we just shake hands and part ways? Like, this is I'm not happy. And I don't think, I can't speak for you. I don't think you're happy either. And so we agreed to get divorced. And from that moment on, I felt like I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, I felt like, okay, I can find myself again. I was lost. I was just lost. I didn't know who I was. I wasn't as self-aware as I needed to be. There's just so many things I look back on. I'm like, wow, I just was lost. And I was in the grind of the job and the grind of supporting my kids and all the stuff that a lot of people go through. But it's funny you say that, Matt, about, people in their 40s start a new business. The statistic I read is, it happens between the age 40 and 55, because a lot of men have earned a good living, and then they start to feel micromanaged, or they start to have these feelings of I'm stuck, and they want to feel unstuck. And so from, my own personal journey was just, again, it's I will never say a bad word about my ex-wife. It's just, we just grew apart. But it's what I needed to be happy in life and move on. And, I made that very difficult decision, and I have zero regrets about it. There's a lot of sadness and guilt, but zero regrets.
Wow. So you then, obviously that brings you out of the depression, and obviously making the adjustment, tying that all
I made the adjustment. I changed my job, my relationship situation, where I lived. I made many, many adjustments that year. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? I do wonder when they talk about how in the sort of the first cycle of your working life, it's all about success.
Yeah.
In the second cycle of your working life, it's all about significance. And so there's this shift where I move from I have to make a shed load of cash to support a lifestyle, to going, well, what's the lifestyle I'm actually trying to support?
Right.
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 And what's the impact of that lifestyle? And I tend to find this is quite unique, maybe I'm going to call us the older entrepreneurs, not in a pretentious way, but just, we've been around a few years, and I've had the sports cars, Chris.
Yep.
I drive a van now. And it's the best car I've ever owned in many ways.
All right.
And it's, and I'm just like, there were some things I had to get out of my system, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think I look at life differently now. I think I look at lifestyle differently. I think I look at what I need differently than, and maybe that's a season. Maybe my kids are getting on, 2 of them have left home. I've got 1 left in the house. Maybe that's why, I don't know. But I'm intrigued because here you are, you've had that mental shift, haven't you? It feels like, when you're working in corporate, you want the Range Rover because there's success, and I've got to measure that achievement, and this is how I measure it. Yep. When I work for myself, I measure that success in a different way, maybe.
Correct. 1,000%. I mean, and I talk about a Range Rover. I did own one back in 20 years ago, and I found that one of the best cars I ever owned, but it was in the shop every other month. I was sitting next to a hockey player named Mark Savard, who you may not know. He played for the Bruins. Now I'm making like $300,000 a year, maybe at the time. Mark Savard's making $4 million a year. Okay.
Wow.
I'm sitting in the dealership, and he's sitting next to me. We're talking about hockey and stuff, and I'm sitting there going like, I don't make $4 million a year. Like, why am I driving this car? Like, I really shouldn't be driving this car. Like, I make good money, but like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And because every time I'm in the shop, it's $2, $3, $4 grand. And so I just started to dial some of that stuff back. But to your point now, it's like I talk about in my author talks, the X, Y, and Z axis. Like, everybody has to put in the axis of like, what's going to make you the most happy with the least amount of anxiety, so your bills are paid and you're achieving the goals that you want to achieve. And, Simon's, the books I have behind me, I mean, my 3 favorite books, right? Start with Why, Simon Sinek, Marshall Goldsmith, Will Get You Here, Won't Get You There. And of course, my own book now, Make the Adjustment.
Yeah.
But chapter 1, I literally reference Simon Sinek, start with why. Like, what is your greater purpose? Like, why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? What's going to make you happy? Mm-hmm. And once you establish the purpose, all the studies have been done on once you're purpose driven, you'll get up earlier, you'll stay later. I mean, Matt, I work this weekend. Now I say I work this weekend. I'm an entrepreneur. Okay. I had to finish reading the book for Audible. I go in 3 hours on Saturday, 3.5 hours on Sunday. It didn't feel like work. Like, it's my passion. I love doing it. It doesn't feel like work. So I feel very lucky to be making half of what I used to make, but doing the work that I love to do. And like you said, it's purpose-driven work. And I know the impact it has on other people, which gives me great joy.
Yeah. I love this purpose-driven work. I think did you know what your purpose was in your 20s?
So no, not in my 20s. I'll tell you why, because I talk about professional baseball. When I was a kid, I was a husky, overweight kid in the North Shore of Massachusetts, trying to find myself like any adolescent would. And I found that I was pretty good at baseball. It started to bring me self-esteem and confidence. And when I was like age 10 or 11, I'm like, I want to play professional baseball. And everybody laughed at me. Like, Chris, nobody from Tewksbury's ever played baseball. Like, it's a joke. Sure enough, I win Mass State Player of the Year. I was just on my mission. I'm like, I am going to do this. I'm going to prove people wrong. This is what I'm going to do. I had a quote on my wall. It said, the greatest pleasure in life is proving other people wrong, basically. And I'm like, I will prove all these people wrong. And sure enough, I went to a great school. I got drafted, played professional baseball. Now, 4 years into it, I played for 4 seasons. You start to look up the food chain and say, wow, there's a lot of good players ahead of me. Am I really going to make it to the big leagues? And people have said, Chris, are you any good? I'm like, well, I was a top 100 third baseman in the world. So top 100, top 1% of 1% is pretty good. However, there's only 35 or 40 third basemen that play in the big leagues. So if I'm ranked 100, there's still 60 guys I got to get past. And I have a math degree. So I started to see the realization of like, wow, I'm probably not going to make the big leagues. So when I retired, my dad was in sales. I was a natural extrovert. I'm like, I'll get a sales career going. But did I know what my purpose was other than making sure I supported my family? No, I didn't really know at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I think purpose is one of those things that sort of is revealed to you as you walk through life, isn't it? It becomes clearer as your experience becomes clearer. And I think purpose is different to goals. I definitely had goals in my 20s.
Right.
but purpose is a trickier one, I think. And maybe because we didn't talk about it as much back then. This was I'm going back to the sort of the late 80s, early 90s.
You're right.
It's not, I don't know. We talked a lot about goals. I remember Brian Tracy and all those guys talking about goals all the time. Listen, Chris, I'm getting engrossed in the conversation, but I'm aware of time and I don't want it just to run away from me. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to connect with you, maybe get the book, what's the best way to do that?
You bet. So you can find me on Instagram at MTA Consultancy, CY at the end. And I'm also on Instagram at MTA-Consultancy. You can find me there as well. And if anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Amazon, Make the Adjustment by Chris Mayer, you can find it there. And I'm proud to say, 562 copies sold. It hit number 24 on the list last week on Amazon, which was really cool to see, climbing the charts, in my category anyways. So it's, you can reach out to me at any of those channels.
Fantastic. We will, of course, link to all of those in the show notes. So if you're listening on your favorite podcast app, you can scroll down and the links will be there. If you're watching on YouTube, they will be in the description. And of course, you will also find them on our website with the transcript and show notes at pushtobemore.com. But Chris, genuinely loved the conversation, man. Really appreciate it. Big shout out again to Neil. Thanks for introducing us.
Yep.
But it's been wonderful, man. And I wish you all the best with the business.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm really glad we're connected. I know we'll talk again. And thanks for allowing me to talk to your audience as well and share my story. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thanks, Matt. Fantastic. Well, that's a wrap on another phenomenal conversation. Let me do this because I can. There we go. Woo-woo. Yeah. Massive round of applause for Chris for joining us today. Huge thanks also to today's champion sponsor, PodJunction. Like I said, if you want to understand podcasting and how it can really help you with your business, go check it out, podjunction.com. Now, remember, keep pushing to be more. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts from, because we've got some more great conversations coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of them. And in case no one has told you yet today, let me be the first. You are awesome. Yes, you are. Created awesome. It's just a burden you have got to bear. Chris has got to bear it. I've got to bear it. You've got to bear it as well. Now, Push to Be More is brought to life, as I said, by PodJunction. The transcripts, the show notes are all on the website. Big kudos to the PodJunction team for making this show possible. But from Chris and from me, thanks for joining in. Have an awesome week. I'll catch you on the flip side. Until then, keep pushing. Bye for now.